Let's pivot back right now from breaking news there to what's taking place in Taiwan. A couple of minutes back, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has put out the congratulatory note out of the U.S. here for President Ching-te. Let's take the helm, really, of the inputs there at the very heart of the geopolitical conversation and the rivalry between the U.S. and what's taking place in China. We heard from the Chinese. We've now also heard from the U.S., from Antony Blinken. Lai is set to give his inaugural address very soon, which will be closely watched, of course, for signs and how they will navigate this very complex relationship and their place in it, of course. Stephen Engle, our Chief North Asia correspondent, rejoins us now from Taipei with his guest. Steve, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Dave. Yes, it is now President Ching-te and Vice President Kim. They have been sworn in as the next administration, of course, a sort of a continuity administration from the past 8 years of Tsai Ing-wen, the president, now former president. There are a lot of issues, obviously, domestically, but also internationally, geopolitically, and the relationship that Taiwan plays in the supply chain, the global supply chain of semiconductors, and the role it plays in the geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States. Let's broaden the analysis of this inauguration day and bring in two of our guests. One who is here sitting to the left of me, Raymond Sung, Vice President of the Prospect Foundation. And also down the line, we have Karis Templeman, Hoover Institution Research Fellow. So we're going to talk about a number of different things, gentlemen. Raymond, let me begin with you. And I can also pose the same question to Karis here. As Ching-te takes over as president, there are issues of his mandate, how much of a mandate he potentially has. He got 40% of the vote, right? At the same time, we have the former president of the Kuomintang, the KMT, going to Beijing and getting welcomed by Xi Jinping. There's a polarization in this country. How much does all of this potentially undermine the opening days of President Lai's term?
I think for the whole term, for the Ching-te administration, that will be a huge divisive issues on this, which pretty much a continuation of what's happening during the campaign. The basic differences between the two camps is whether Taiwan should strengthen its capability to defend itself versus to have a more negotiable or more friendly relations, trying to achieve peace by dialogue. I think that debate will continue. But it's one thing to remember that the voters of Taiwanese gave Ching-te a clear mandate to maintain this past 8 years deterrence project, which means that we will cooperate with the United States and the international allies to strengthen ourselves of capabilities to defend.
You're a regular commentator in Taiwan media. You do expect a bumpy road ahead, though, for cross-strait ties. What do you expect from his speech, which will be held within this hour? What kind of tone should he strike?
The dilemma for any speeches for the president of Taiwan is how do you maintain the status quo, but not giving too much weight to the one China policy which Beijing wanted to hear. So for the Tsai Ing-wen administration, which will be the constitution of the ROC Taiwan, but for Ching-te, there will be a nuance to that I expected, which will be constitutional order of the ROC Taiwan, which means that's not pretty much 100% tied to the text of the constitution, but the whole order developed by the democratic Taiwan within its constitutions.
Karis, let me bring you in here. I know you've been watching this election process quite closely. I mentioned that he got 40% of the vote, but that's because there were three main candidates with the upstart TPP, Ke Wen-je, kind of throwing a bit of a spanner in the works there. But the DPP lost the majority in the Legislative Yuan by 1 seat, essentially, to the KMT. And there's been some already political wrangling going on and fights going on within the parliament body. How much of a mandate do you feel that Ching-te actually has?
Well, I think if we compare his situation to Tsai Ing-wen's 8 years ago, he's clearly boxed in a way that she was not. He obviously won only 40% of the vote. He doesn't have a legislative majority. When I was there in January talking to DPP officials after the election, the working assumption was that he may actually struggle to win re-election in 4 years. So I think he has a lot less room to maneuver domestically than he did, than his predecessor did, either 8 years or 4 years ago.
Now, obviously, Taiwan is very strategic. That's why we put so much emphasis on this election process, strategically, economically, with semiconductors, but obviously militarily and the potential conflict across the Taiwan Strait. I know you wrote one of the chapters, or co-wrote one of the chapters in the book, The Silicon Triangle. And if we can bring chips into this dialogue, there's been a lot of talk about this so-called silicon umbrella, that the importance and the rise of the semiconductor industry makes Taiwan far more strategic now than it was in decades past. Do you buy that argument? And what happens when there is this friendshoring trend where manufacturing of chips is going to Kumamoto, Japan? It's going to Arizona. Does that lessen Taiwan's strategic importance to the United States?
I don't think it lessens the strategic importance of Taiwan to the United States. And in fact, Taiwan's own importance far precedes the emergence of the semiconductor industry as a thing in Taiwan. So the U.S. was very concerned about Taiwan's security in the 80s and 90s as well. And the other thing to note here is that TSMC itself is running up against limits of production in Taiwan. The semiconductor industry as a whole is producing, they account for something like 20% of Taiwan's overall GDP by themselves. And so you can't take that number much higher without having some major negative impacts on the overall diversity of Taiwan's economy. And so I actually think the future of the semiconductor industry is going to be increasingly global. And TSMC is doing the right thing by trying to diversify parts of their supply chain and parts of their production outside of Taiwan. Taiwan is, facing challenges with recruiting labor, with having enough electricity and water, and just being able to build out the fabs that they need for the next generation of production, and diversifying to satisfy concerns of both other foreign governments, but also more importantly their own customers, including big customers like Apple, who are concerned about an interruption of potential crucial supplies. I think those things are all important here.
So, Raymond, in the realm of safety and geopolitics and the protective umbrella of the United States, do chips make Taiwan safer or more vulnerable, potentially?
In terms of friendshoring, it's definitely safer because Taiwan proved itself to be so essential in the global supply chain, especially in the advanced chip making. And so for the short term, Taiwan is an integral role for the global supply chain. So the allies will try everything to defend the stability of the supply chain.
Now, militarily, how prepared is Taiwan, and what still needs to be done? He's bringing in a new defense minister, Wellington Koo. He's a civilian. We haven't had that in more than a decade. So does that help break down maybe the vested interests within the Taiwan military? With the defense minister is usually a former general or something.
We hope so. That's a clear signal that Taiwan got very serious about its defense reform. Because for the modern warfare, it's very clear that's not decided by the battlefield, but for the whole society. For example, for the reform of the society, civil resilience, and the building of our psychological defense toward, for example, propaganda, will be the whole overall wholesome view to the national security. I think national defense will be part of it, integral part of it.
They need to modernize and make it more of a military that is more mobile, more flexible, and modern with the times, and have that porcupine strategy. It's hard to devour a porcupine full of missiles, right?
Yeah, and with international consolidation, and for example, to really talk pinpointedly about what Taiwan needs to defend, no matter porcupine or for the deterrence of gray zone operations from China, and to cooperate with the allies like Japan and Philippines.
Karis, let me bring you back into the conversation. What do you expect, and what do you think the Lai administration needs to do to keep the peace across the Taiwan Strait at a heightened sense of conflict, if you will, or the threat of a conflict?
Yeah, well, I think on the one hand, there's a need to kind of stay the course on Tsai Ing-wen's approach to cross-strait relations and relations with the United States. So Tsai was, I've argued many times that she was about the best president the U.S. could hope for in Taiwan because there were no surprises in the relationship. And so if Lai is able to follow her lead and to maintain that consistent, reliable partnership with the United States, I think he will help preserve peace across the strait. And then secondly, I think some of the defense reforms that the Tsai administration started to put in place still have a long ways to go. And if Lai is able to move those to the next level, so deepening the training of conscripts, for instance. The Tsai administration has just reimposed a one-year conscription requirement, and there's a lot of concern outside of Taiwan that may look a lot like the old conscription training, where there wasn't a whole lot of shooting of guns or other things that might actually be applicable to a real fight. And so having some more realistic training in that process is, I think, important.